typically get hung up on is this entering part. They've trained it, they've got the husbandry down, they've trapped the hawk, they know, but they can't get it entered. They can't figure out a way to do that, and so there's some prerequisites to that.
Welcome to the Wilderness Wonders Podcast, Episode 2. Today we have a very special guest with us named Matthew Mullenix. He is a falconer and author and has written 4 books, with 4 falconry fundamentals being one of his most popular. We were able to catch him on his book tour, and we had a wonderful discussion about the principles of falconry. Also, this episode is brought to you by Mike's Falconry. On your next purchase of $50 or more, be sure to use the code WILDERNESS, WILDERNESS, and you can get 5% off your order. So without further ado, let's get right into it. To our Wilderness Wonders. This is our second ever episode, and we get to have, actually I'll let you introduce yourself and we can of course go from there.
Yeah, so I'm Matt Mullenix, and I am a falconer from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I have written a couple of falconry books. One that's the most popular is American Kestrels and Modern Falconry. Been out for a while, but I have a new one that I just put out, 4 falconry fundamentals, and I'm sort of taking a little hawking trip / book tour / social distance nightmare trip around the country to sort of help promote the book and spread the word about it.
That is awesome. It sounds like a really fun trip. Do you make this trip every year, or is it?
I make a Thanksgiving hawking trip every year.
Thanksgiving hawking trip.
And I usually go to see good friends of ours in Amarillo, Texas, and we have a great time. But due to this year's unprecedented pandemic situation, giant Thanksgiving gatherings are just not to be done. So
yeah, it's been really interesting this year. But what's been your favorite spots so far? Have you gone hawking at all yet?
Yeah, I had a couple of objectives for the trip, and seeing Harry McElroy is one of them. So he, just sort of the grand old man of American falconry, and desert hawking being the first of his series of sort of related books about mostly hunting quail in his desert habitat. Yeah. And these were the first books, the first sort of American author that I had read that really wrote about practical falconry. Kind of the good, the bad, and the ugly, and in plain language, and less of how falconry is supposed to happen, and more about how falconry actually happens, and with the goal of catching game. And so marrying these two ideas that that you should be catching game, but it's
Absolutely.
not. But it's not textbook ever. And the dogs don't work right, and the hawk doesn't work right, and sometimes you got to hood them upside down. And
my friend had to do that to his deer falcon once. It was hanging like a bat, and he hooded it.
Yeah, no, you don't see a picture of that in a book,
not too often,
except in desert hawking. So, and even Harry would say this is not the pinnacle of falconry, but this is how frankly falconry happens a lot. So. Anyway, it was refreshing, and he's been somebody I have followed and has been a mentor to me. So I wanted to see him. He's, in maybe one of his last years of hawking, and he hawks kind of on a grand scale, a horseback with long wing on quail and big desert country. It's really impressive to see.
What birds is he flying?
Well, he flies. This year, an Aplomado gyrfalcon.
I've been dreaming of an Aplomado, actually.
Yeah, they're fantastic birds and super engaging. And he flies this typical style is falcons off the fist, and he kind of lets them do whatever they want to. They end up coming and landing on his head, and he's riding. And then when the dogs get on point, then the chase begins, and it's very free form.
Awesome. So he still flies them kind of like dirt hawking.
It's still like dirt hawking.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And he flies, Harris hawks and Cooper's hawks also. Most of desert hawking is Harris hawks, Cooper's hawks, and then Appomattox falcons also. So these are the kind of birds that he really likes. So seeing him, giving him a copy of the book, which is, sort of basic hunting principles that I learned in part from Harry's books, and have replicated in my own falconry career. And wanted him to have a copy of it, and just to hear from me that what a big fan I am, and
that's awesome.
And how much of a
it's kind of fun meeting your heroes or the people that you've looked up to.
Absolutely.
I think it's always a blast.
Absolutely, and we don't take the opportunity to do that, and we should. But so I saw Harry, went hunting with Harry, gave him a book. All that was great. I saw my friend Lauren McGow, who's the eagle falconer lady, and
very popular eagle falconer.
Yeah, so she's fantastic, a PhD anthropologist, and obviously engaged in eagles. And we caught her bird's first jack for the season.
Oh, that's awesome!
Then it was a fantastic, morning. Just the right number of real close calls, like 5 super close slips and big clouds of dust, and then a connection.
That is that's got to be so exciting.
Yeah. And then the Smiths and Charlie and Pam, and just a wonderful little group of people that live right there in Kingman, and in the middle of this gorgeous country. Lots of game, and although they probably won't want me to say that, just don't come. There's no game. It's terrible.
There's nothing there.
Awful. There's nothing there. But I really enjoyed that, and then and it just happens that coming through Salt Lake is the fastest way to get to Sheridan, where my publisher is, and so
awesome.
So that leg of this trip.
Well, I'm glad you came through Salt Lake. I was able to chat with you real quick.
Yes, absolutely. glad to have the opportunity.
Great. Well, let's go ahead and rewind just a little bit and talk about what actually got you started in falconry, or got you started in wildlife or animals in general.
Well, like a lot of falconers, I always was outside, always was picking up bugs and snakes, and I had as a kid pet tarantulas were my thing, and always bringing home turtles and whatever else I found. And when I was 13, I was coming home on the bus and saw a little group of kids in the next bus stop from mine, and they were poking a stick at something, and so I, curious, got off and flushed the kids away, and it was a little baby screech owl. And this was in Panama, Republic of Panama, where my dad was stationed at the time, and at that time there were, there's no federal Panamanian, regulations, and wouldn't have known about them anyway at 13, and scooped up the baby owl and took it to a veterinarian neighbor and kind of got started that way. Eventually they sent me more birds and asked me if I wanted a hawk, and I had already, read all about falconry, and so I got a broad-winged hawk that was a rehab bird, but it.
What species?
A broadwing.
That is the species.
Yeah. Buteo platypteris. It's a small buteo. It looks just like a tiny red tail.
Oh, interesting.
And, like 300 to 400 grams, and.
That's really small.
Yeah, they're super small, but they're built exactly the same as a little red tail, and they're real cool. Real common, and they migrate. The whole population migrates to South America every year, and they migrate through Panama.
That's cool.
And so a lot of them in their first year don't make it, and this was one of those that was starving to death essentially. But we had a little very tame bird called a clay-colored robin in Panama, and that's what he caught. So I trained him and flew him a little bit, not very successfully, but able to make in on your first kill, and then for the rest of your life you're just.
So you were able to have success with your first bird that you had.
Yeah, I mean, it was nothing to write home about, but considering that you got one library book to go off.
Yeah, that's seriously impressive. There's plenty of falconers out there today, apprentice falconers, who struggle so hard to just catch anything their first year, or don't catch anything for the first 2 years, and they even have they have sponsors trying to guide them and they still struggle.
Right.
So it's super awesome that you had such a positive experience just learning about it or figuring it out on your own.
Right.
Did you have animal training experience before that, or was this like your first animal you've ever tried to train?
It was, I guess it would besides dogs,
Dogs.
We had dogs as a kid, but I do remember the first time, letting it go and taking it off the line and not even having there wasn't a sponsor. I had nobody. So having to figure out, what should I do if it goes and sits in a tree, which is exactly what it did, and not come down, which is exactly what it did. But finally, came down to this crude leather lure that I had built for it, and we just kind of progressed from there. But your point about apprentices and first year people not being able to catch game or see it done or be able to put together the fundamentals of falconry, which of which there are not a zillion of them, right? So part of the reason for the book is to sort of spell those things out, to help people to put everything together with the goal of catching game. And
I think a lot of us forget. Well, some falconers or people in general who see falconry forget that it is also. It is a hunting sport. That's what it all surrounds.
Right. Exactly.
Is hunting. You pursue wild game.
Yeah, and it's of course there's more than that. Now,
yeah.
it is. It's not that it isn't the beauty of the flight. It's not that it isn't the camaraderie in the field of your friends. It's not that it isn't conservation. It's not that it isn't bird watching. It's all of those things. But it's a hunting sport.
Yep.
And if you're not hunting with your hawk, you're doing abatement, or you're doing education, or you're doing something else. And those are also great things.
Yeah, I think they're fantastic.
But to pursue falconry is to hunt with a bird of prey, and to the extent that that's your goal, which as a falconer should be your goal, there are a set number of sort of prerequisites that you have to have, and so what we spell out there are that there should be 4 of them. So you got prey base, essentially. Do you have enough game to hunt where you are, and that's the first consideration. Not what kind of hawk you want, not what kind of falconer you want to be, but do you have game where you are, and then you kind of build your falconry based on that one thing.
Absolutely. Pick the quarry, and then
pick the quarry,
and then get the hawk or falcon of what fits that quarry.
Right. Exactly.
Best.
And a lot of them. You may have in mind a quarry that happens to be rare. Well, this is going to work against you immediately.
Yeah.
So it takes a lot of whatever you're after to catch. So there's prey base, husbandry. Are you keeping the hawk well? And when people call, you've been around falconry long enough, people start to know your name, and they call you and they say, hey, look, I know you've done well with this species. Mine's not coming along. I'm just not connecting. We're not catching game, but we're almost there, but we're not doing it. And so I've had a lot of these conversations with people, and it turns out that there's a pattern to failure. There's a pattern to how people fail to succeed at falconry if success is defined as catching game. And so prey base, they don't have enough of the prey that they want to hunt, or they don't know what they want to hunt, or they don't they've never seen it hunted before, so they don't even know how to do it. Husbandry, and not the width of the flange on the jess, right? That's never going to be the difference between catching a rabbit and not catching a rabbit. But are the talons sharp? Are you keeping the feathers intact? Do you have the right food for the bird? These are sort of basic things.
Hydrated, well fed enough. Maybe you're flying it with way too low weight, things like that.
Right. So the husbandry component is real important. Recall, which is sort of a term I use to be all-encompassing, training, and does the bird understand what you want it to do? But broadly speaking, a lot of people will call, and you realize after talking to them, the bird does not come back. Literally, there's no recall. That's the problem. Is that not only does the bird not come back to them when they need it, but they can't get it in position to hunt game, which leads to the 4th fundamental, which is slip management. And this is really hard for people, especially apprentices who've never seen falconry done, or maybe they don't come from a hunting background. But there's kind of a physics to hunting. There's a height advantage, there's speed advantage, there's physical size. There's all these sort of very physical components to hunting that you need to be able to break apart and see what components you might be missing. And how do you set up a slip so you have enough game, but how do you put the hawk in position to catch it? Is your hawk fast enough? Is the prey close enough to cover, or too far? Or you need it to be far enough away that the hawk can catch it before it gets to cover. And this sort of fieldcraft component usually takes the longest for people to learn. And a lot of people start in falconry without even thinking about hunting. They're really concentrating on the bird. I just need a bird on my fist. And that's,
or a bird just to fly to you.
Or a bird just to fly to you. And these are, like I say in the book, this is not an accomplishment that a lot of people are even capable of. So it's not a terrible thing that you've got this bird that you've trained to come to you. You've got a wild hawk that's coming to you, and that's a fantastic thing.
And I would have to agree, like the first time that it happened with me, it was such a magic moment.
Yes.
And it's so cool that this animal flies to you, and then you get so wrapped up in it that when you get out into the field, it flies away. Oh, I'll just put a tippet on, and it flies right back. And then now that bird's not focused on hunting, but he's focused on your hand.
So you could So I talk about that about overtraining and entering.
Oh yeah.
And this this idea that between recall and slip management, there's entering, right? Like that is the actual activity that needs to happen after you've trained it, but before you set up a slip. And one of the things that I try to explain in the book is this idea that we tend to train hawks like we learn things in school, one step at a time. You master one step, you go to the next step. You master that step, you go to the next step. When really hawks are not, they don't operate that way, and neither do we. We're sort of more holistic learners. You can learn 2 or 3 things at once. You can learn something once by looking at it. It's not necessary that you have to really hammer one thing until it's mastered and then go to the next thing. So this is a part of falconry that apprentices or novices typically get hung up on, is this entering part. They've trained it, they've got the husbandry down, they trap the hawk, they know, but they can't get it entered. They can't figure out a way to do that. And so there's some prerequisites to that. It's the weight management, recall, but then sort of bleeding into how do I find a good slip for it. And
I feel like that's the hardest part in falconry, is going from your training, like in your backyard or park, and then you're trying to get it to catch game.
Yes.
And that little bit can be the most difficult struggle of all of trying to be a successful falconer.
Yeah. So and the answer to that struggle, that problem, as I've always thought about it, is that we don't think of the end product. The end product is a trained hawk, right? The end product is a hawk that you go pick up on game. And because we don't think backwards like that, we don't think with the end goal in mind. We think stepwise up to that goal. We don't know it when we see it. And so I can tell you from experience, it's possible to enter a bird on the first day. Right, and it should be fairly easy to do that. If you've got enough game, if you have in your mind a picture of the end product, then you will have been training the bird in that direction all the way. And a little bit of your discussion with Steve in the first podcast kind of touched on that, about his point being, as I took it, that the hunting was more important. He clearly has an idea in his head of what the end product of that hunt looks like, and so training to the drone is for him a diversion, right? Like going off in a different direction, and that can happen not just with drones, but with any sort of training. And so keeping this idea in mind, you want a red-tailed catches rabbit, right? And you want a red-tail that lets you walk up to it and pick it up on game. So in order for that to happen, you've got to have the field already in mind. You've got to have a place that's got enough rabbits. The bird's got to come to you when you call it. Well, then you just take it to the field that's got enough rabbits. It comes to you when you call it, put it in a tree, start flushing. So your first day of entering,
have a plan of what your first day should look like, and that's what you want to try to work towards.
And that's where we fail, is that we don't use our imagination to picture that first day and realize, okay, if I want this to happen, these are the things that I need to have up front.
Yeah.
And you think the bird's just going to do all this for you. It just doesn't. If you can overtrain it where it's just looking at you, but then you realize that trained hawk doesn't just look at you. A trained hawk flies off the fist, goes to a tree, starts looking for rabbits, and waits for you to come in, start flushing for it.
Absolutely.
That's the setup that you're trying to create.
Yeah, it reminds me of my first compared to my second year. My first year passage hawk, I did struggle getting it started on game, and it took a while, and I didn't visualize that end goal. I eventually did get him hunting rabbits when I figured out how to get him into a better position to find them. But then my second year, since I knew what that position was, when I had a new passage on my second year, first free flight after about 3 weeks of training, took her out for the first free flight. She caught a rabbit on her second slip, and it was just all about getting her in the proper position. Where my first year, I couldn't really figure out how to get him in the proper position. And I think some of that does also come from experience, is knowing where the best position is, or maybe where the best spots are.
Right. And there's no substitute for experience. Like you got to have that. You got to have that failure in order to know how to set yourself up to succeed.
Oh yeah, and I definitely learned a lot from it.
Right. No, of course. And that's the thing about falconry is that for all the successes, there's a dozen failures. And that never stops. I mean, you'll ruin the suspense for you and tell you you're going to be failing. Even at Harry McElroy's age, and he'll be happy to say that just means he's in the field. Doing the thing that he loves. But so you learned in your first year through missing the mark what you succeeded in the second year.
Almost immediately.
Yes. Well, it's helpful to know going into it. Okay, that look, slip management's important, right? Like I'm going to need, I don't know what position means, but I know I need it. And that bird, I don't know what a good position would be for this field. I don't know how the game is going to work the field. I don't know how, if I've got two people, how that's different than just myself. Making a little pincher maneuver to push the rabbits out in the open, maybe on a little narrow strip of a fence post, fence line. And trying to reduce the options for the prey while you increase the options for the hawk.
Absolutely.
Right? Basically, you're trying to stack up advantages for your hawk and reduce the advantages for the prey.
And there's also a lot of trust. I've noticed there's a lot of trust between like the falconer and their bird. I notice it with my red tail. I have to trust that she's setting herself up in the right position at times. If she wants to leave my T-perch and go up into a tree, I want to trust that she's setting herself up for success. And a lot of times I'll start walking and I'll walk around the tree and all of a sudden I scare a jackrabbit or a cottontail for her to chase, and she loves it. And then other times she puts her whole trust in me and decides, I don't want to be in those trees, I'd rather be on your T-perch because that provides me the better advantage. And so it's kind of like this trust that I love that we built with each other, and I don't think we gained that trust on the first day we went hunting. That was built after making sure that she was provided slip after slip after slip, dozens and dozens of slips later. It built this whole trust where I can just trust her that she'll set herself up, and then she can just trust me that I'll set herself up if she's not having success where she is.
Well, so what you're describing, I think, is a kind of a mutual understanding. Right. So this and this conversation that happens, where she follows you sometimes, you follow her sometimes, but you both have the same goal, and you understand that goal. And I think, although that goal is kind of at its pinnacle in the field where you're hunting, and you really can't substitute anything for that except for that hunt experience. You can start the communication from day one, and that's just by being very consistent, with the way you present the food, with the way you pick the bird up, with the way that you behave, with the timing of your feeding, with the timing of your weighing, with when you set a set schedule for the hawk. That the hawk learns to understand, then that's like the first couple of words that you both understand. So you're building this language that's gonna lead to trust, and it'll lead to trust that is going to have immediate return on your investment in the field. So that that I would say can start on day one.
And that's a pretty common thing that goes across all animals in general. I mean, even humans, animals tend to be creatures of habit. They like things to remain the same thing every day. Right. They love routine, and they love knowing what to expect.
Right.
And so trying to share that consistent story with the bird that you're working with.
Right. And they've got no frame of reference for you unless you give them a frame of reference, right? And they are creatures of habit, and they do understand habit. So if you show them a habit, they get it. They get you, and they start to trust you based on that. And I think, I've always thought it's really no different than meeting somebody that has no cultural association with you, doesn't speak the language, raised in a different part of the world, and you try to start a car together, or do some sort of complex thing where you have to get from point A to point B. How are you going to do that? How do first of all, you have to establish some kind of lines of communication. Maybe the first communication is, I'm not going to kill you, right? And that's sort of like when you trap a wild hawk. You have to convince them, okay, first thing I'm not going to do is hurt you.
Yeah.
And then, second thing is, I'm going to show up at the same time every day. I'm going to feed you at the same time every day. It's going to be the same kind of good food, every day. You're just going to build on these mutual understandings.
And then your hawk, it doesn't even take too long for the hawk to get excited for them to,
Absolutely.
I mean, only a few days, and then they're stoked to see you and ready to eat and train. And
I mean, the thing that's
great.
That a hawk really doesn't like, that is the same thing you would really not like, is not knowing.
Yeah.
Is being in a condition where you're constrained, like you're not where you think you should be. You're not anywhere that you've ever been before, and you have no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
Every single day, every single moment is stressful because you have no idea. And so even a little bit of control that you give the bird, to understand that this guy's going to show up again at this time, and he's going to do exactly the same thing as he did before. Hawks really respond well to that, just because I think it takes the stress out of it.
Yeah, that can be applied to all animals in general too. I mean, especially even like dogs. Dogs love to have that consistent. Right. You said you hunt with using dogs as well, right?
Yes, right. So so I've last two dogs I've had for their whole lifetime, 16-year careers, are whippets, which a lot of people are using sighthounds now with their birds of prey, which is great. It's an ancient, cooperative behavior.
I've heard of whippets being used for flushing rabbits and birds.
So it turns out they're pretty versatile little dogs, and funny enough, I have always used mine to flush sparrows.
Awesome.
For my hawks, and they end up doing that very well. While you can still chase squirrels with them and rabbits, but when we go, they act more like a spaniel, than a sighthound. But yeah, so whippets in particular, I kind of think of as the most hawk-like of the dogs. And then if you've got a Harris that you're flying the most dog-like of the hawks. Yeah. And they make a really good pair.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So I have enjoyed that. And
how do you go about, say, entering a hawk and a dog, getting we were just talking about how the hawk, getting them to that result that we want them to be at. Right. How do you go about doing that for the dog and the hawk together? Because that just sounds so complicated whenever I think about it.
Well, the way I manage a complication like that is to try to get the animals to do as much of the work as possible. And in order to do that, you got to figure out what motivates them, right? And it turns out that at least for the sighthounds, which are pretty simplistic, they're pretty predator type animals. I mean, there's not a lot of complicated training in a sighthound. They pretty much come on board with what they need. They like to chase things, they like to catch things, they like to eat things, which is pretty hawk-like in its outlook. So what I do with the sighthounds when they're puppies is basically give them opportunities to chase and catch things, and then make sure that they really like to do that, which they immediately do. And but for the day that you put them together, there's actually quite a bit of literature about that, about how do you introduce them. And some people say, well, if you introduce them too early, the hawk and the dog, they won't be able to communicate with each other. They won't trust each other. The hawk might be scared of the dog might run in. Main thing you need to do.
I think I've seen more dogs terrified of the hawks.
Well, but that's just as bad a problem, really.
It definitely is.
They really need to both understand what the goal is. And so I figure
that the relationship is mutual.
Yeah. And it'll grow. They get to understand each other better and they actually, I think, understand each other more quickly than people and hawks do. I mean, hawks and dogs really do figure themselves out pretty quick. But I like to at least have caught 6 head, 6 to 10 head with the hawk before you bring the dog into it. And the dog, so I'm not I consider myself a dog trainer at all, and I probably couldn't train a pointing dog to save my life. And what Steve does with his dogs is amazing. But with a sight hound, it just has to stop. And for most falconry dogs, regardless of the breed, the only thing they really need to do is stop when you tell them to stop. And whether it's whoa or stop or start
stop or come whenever they need to.
It's got to stop doing what it's doing and not move, because that's the really it's the one thing that's going to ruin your falconry is the dog keeps going. And that means you got to stop it from flushing too early. You got to stop it from running in on the hawk while it's on the game. You got to stop it from running over to a car. Stop is important. So
part of the reason I actually ask is 7 days ago, exactly a week ago, I brought home a lab English pointer, a 2-year-old lab English pointer. And she's very good at using her nose, which I really love. We've already been doing exercises of looking for rabbits and finding the rabbits, and her getting a reward for them, and dragging a lure around for her to chase, and she loves doing that. And she's a pretty obedient dog in general, and she learns very quickly. How would you, I mean, it's a selfish question, but I think this is a cool example, even for people listening, is how do you think I should go about getting this dog and my hawk into the field? They've already seen each other quite a bit. And the dog is learning to respect the hawk's space. The hawk is learning to not fear the dog, and that's going well. So from there, how would I go about entering them into the field together?
Well, so it depends a little bit on your goal, and so like we were speaking before, having in mind what's like the best possible outcome for you, and picture that in your head of what you imagine that partnership to look like, and then make sure that you're not doing anything that's sort of in an opposite direction of that. But for and some of that's going to evolve. The main thing is, for the hawks are very serious, and the dogs are not always very serious. Hawks want to hunt, and there's not a whole lot else going on in a hawk's head but wanting to hunt. And anything that distracts from that is going to annoy the hawk, and is going to work against you. If the dog is not serious about hunting, if the dog doesn't really know what its purpose is, then you might need to work on the dog first and make sure that you've got some sort of communication with the dog that ends in a dead rabbit, essentially. Like, does the dog know how to hunt? And if the dog knows how to hunt, real hunt, not some trained behavior that you've given it, to use Steve's, not going to the drone, right? But actually hunt, a real hunt.
Get them on live quarry as soon as.
But not just live quarry, actual wild game, right? Like hunt it, make that a useful dog in hunting. And it doesn't have to mean that you go shoot rabbits or whatever. It just means that if you want it to flush, that you go out and you flush a couple of rabbits with it, and you encourage it, for him doing that, and he likes it, and he until he gets the picture, that you let him out, and he goes and he finds and flushes rabbits, and then stops. So flush a rabbit, chase a rabbit, stop when you yell at him.
So it's great to really make sure that you have your dog doing, or your dog knows how to, or understands the task at hand pretty well, has a good grasp of it, and also your hawk knowing the task at hand, because you said make sure that it's caught a few things before introducing the dog.
The hawk that you're using is not brand new, right? Is this?
No, I caught her in September, but she's caught 14 rabbits so far. So she's doing excellent. I'm not worried about the hawk, mostly just about the dog.
So being able to control the dog then is the advice I would give you. Make sure you can control the dog, and and if you have to have the dog on a leash the whole time, then probably you don't have enough control over the dog to make it work. The dog needs to be able to be controlled off leash.
Yeah.
And that's really, again, whoa, and
that is my goal.
Yeah.
I do want her off leash, and I do plan on using an e-collar to kind of extend that communication.
Yeah.
Although
if the dog works close.
Tool. Yeah. It kind of all depends.
Right.
So we're still feeling it out.
Keep in mind what you want. It would really be helpful if, within your circle of falconry friends and the people that you know online, if there's somebody who's doing what kind of similar dog or the same type of dog, same quarry, same hawk, and actually getting it done, that's the person you need to talk to.
Absolutely.
Right, and go out hunting with them.
Awesome.
See it in action, and see how often he yells at the dog. See how often the dog comes back to him. Just get your mental picture of what it should look like, and then work toward that. Basically, and I talk about this a little bit in the book. Rather than training specifically a whole bunch of behaviors that you hope will come together eventually, basically avoid the things that are wrong and let the right behaviors emerge. It's just a different approach. It's about having the picture in your head of the outcome that you want, and don't do the things that don't look like that, right? And it makes a pretty fast way to train stuff, because basically a lot of animals will come almost half trained anyway. As long as you don't need it to do the thing that you don't need to train it to do,
yeah.
Right? Then you don't have to worry about that part. If the dog follows you, is looking at you, but also is gamey and is going out. But when you say, "Come on," it circles back around. That's you're already 80%
halfway there.
Right?
Oh, even more.
Yeah, even more than that. So it's really just the main thing about falconry, about dog training, about so much of these things that we do that are very complex and involve a lot of different animals, is having an idea in your head of how it should work, and then sort of following your instincts to get there. Anyways,
it's so interesting. We love working with the birds of prey. We love seeing our birds of prey hunt, and then we're like, oh, but let's introduce a dog, or with Harris's, let's hunt with two at the same time, and you up that complexity.
Right.
And I think some think that we do it just so that we can catch the game or catch the rabbits, when personally it's nothing about trying to get as many rabbits as possible, or killing rabbits, or whatever other quarry other people are doing. It's the whole experience that's really, really fun.
Well, so I would say to that I totally agree that it enhances the experience, and there's a tradition that I've read in books that the French say you can't be a master falconer until you have trained a dog and a hawk to work together, and that's kind of sort of their rule of thumb, meaning really that it's one thing to train hawks and it's one thing to train dogs, but when you get them together, that's when you really get at the pinnacle of falconry. And the experience of having those different animals in the field and the different kinds of partnership is really wonderful. But if the dog is not helping you produce game for the hawk, it should actually produce more game, right? Like you shouldn't have a dog if the dog is working against you, right?
Yeah.
Like, so I can tell you that having a dog for hunting small birds increases the number of small birds you can catch, right? It increases the number of quail that you can catch. There's some types of hunting you cannot do without a dog. You physically cannot do it. And
with Steve Chingren, it would be so difficult to find those grouse.
Right. So those are the things where it's not just an aesthetic, pleasing experience. It's essential that you have a dog.
And some hunting it is essential. I agree.
And once it's a good problem to have. I'm catching too many head of game. Right? I can pull it back a little bit. I can do things that make it more of a challenge for me. But get there first, right? Like before you decide that it's just an aesthetic experience, go ahead and start catching game and be successful, and then decide how successful you want to be.
Yeah. And I noticed that when the hawk progresses really, really fast is when you're putting out as much game for it as possible.
It's 1-to-1, right? It's 1-to-1.
And they start figuring out. They are so intelligent. They figure things out.
Yeah.
They start to understand what your behavior is, and and then they get to enjoy the whole experience as well, and get to carry on. I mean, if you plan on releasing your bird, they get to carry on those skills throughout their life on their own. It's amazing.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think there's a lot of good that is done for the hawk in falconry if the bird is hunted regularly and catching game. Then it is virtually identical to a wild hawk. That's kind of the goal that you hope for, is that you've got it as fit as a wild hawk and
or even more fit.
or even more fit. In some cases, certainly, you can train a hawk that'll do things that a wild hawk won't do or can't do. And but for me, I'm satisfied. And this is, another component of the book is how to define success for yourself, right? And for me, falconry being a hunting sport, the reasonable goal is that I intend to hunt and catch something every hunt, right? Like and so I have a little formula in there, and it's about intended quarry per hunt, right? And it should be something like 1 to 1 on average over the end of the season. And that's the goal that I shoot for. And sometimes you're going to exceed it, and sometimes you don't quite reach it. But what when you've approached it, when you're at 0.7, per hunt, or 0.8 per hunt, or 1 per hunt, or 1.5. Essentially, your bird's catching stuff on a regular basis, and that you intend to catch stuff on a regular basis. There's a line that I had read in one of the early falconry books that I had read about this crusty old falconer, and he looks at somebody else's bird and he goes, yeah, well, the acid test though is, does it catch anything? And that kind of calls BS on a whole lot of falconry. You can have a beautiful bird. There's some exotic, hawk eagle, or some beautiful white gyrfalcon, or a kestrel, or a red tail, and you can be super proud of it. But at the end of the day, does that thing catch stuff? And if it doesn't catch stuff, that puts you in it's sort of
What's the hawk, or what's the bird actually learning? What are
you doing really with it? And not to be harsh on people's different approaches to falconry. There should be a line in the sand at some point, and that line in the sand should be that hawk catches stuff. And if it doesn't catch stuff, you should know you're not doing it right? Like there's a learning curve, and everybody's on one side or the other of the learning curve, and you can get better at it, and maybe you're not catching as much as you want, or maybe you have yet to catch something, but you should want to. And if you don't want to, you're in the wrong sport.
But we want to there are still a lot of falconers, early falconers, that are trying so hard to catch game, and that's not really who we're talking about. It's about people who aren't taking their birds out. They're not.
Oh, absolutely.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
They're not taking their birds out. They're not putting in the time to hunt with their animals. They're probably more glorified pet keepers than.
And there's some people who start out that need to work a little bit harder too. I've got nothing bad to say about anybody learning anything complicated like falconry, or even those of us who've been in the sport long enough, needing a standard that we should still meet. Right, like you don't get to rest on your laurels. If you really want to hunt, it's always going to take work. It's always going to take thought process. It's always going to take having your ducks in a row. Sometimes literally, right? If you want to catch them, sometimes you got to have them, and they got to be in a row. And so that's sort of those things that define my sport. I want to get the hawk in condition, and in position, and catch game. And I won't always succeed, but if I don't succeed, like my friend Spence Wise says, well, I wasn't a falconer today. Tomorrow maybe I'll be a falconer. Today I was not a falconer.
Yes. What would be, say, one of the best advice for a early falconer? I mean, I'm still an early falconer too. I'm still an apprentice right now. I'm approaching the end of my second year.
Yeah.
And they're trying hard to catch game. We're kind of right in the beginning of the season where a lot of new falconers have just got their hawks and trying to get them entered, trying to set up some game. What's some advice that you can give to those those early falconers?
Well, you should avail yourself of the experience and advice that you have around you. Find falconers who are experienced, who are actually succeeding at the thing that you want to do. So don't go and do it alone, right? Like don't make it hard on yourself. If you want to hunt rabbits and you got a rabbit guru, a guy or a gal who hunts every day and comes home with rabbits every day, do what they do. Right, figure it out. Ask them if you can't recognize what it is that you're doing differently than they're doing. Get them to come out with you and say, "Hey, what am I doing wrong?" My view, and this is with regard to the book, what you're doing wrong is going to be one of those 4 things, typically. So figure that out first, too. Like, do you have enough game? Are you keeping your bird's talons sharp? Does it come back to you when you call it? Can you get it in position if you want it to? And do you know how to manage a slip? Do you know what a good slip looks like? And what are the components of that slip? And those things are things that an experienced falconer can teach you just by watching. If you just go out with somebody who ends up with something in the bag, you'll learn a lot more than reading any book. But don't just knock your head against the wall indefinitely. Figure out somebody who's doing it right and go out and watch them. Read a book that is designed to help you catch game. Rather
like
than
the 4 falconry fundamentals.
Like 4 falconry fundamentals. Yes, so well said, and I appreciate you for saying it. But don't get lost in the tiny details about the width of the flanges on the Jess, right?
Yeah.
Like that's not going to be your problem. Your problems are bigger and easier and more sort of universal than that. But the bright side of that is they're easier to solve. It's not rocket science, man. Putting a rabbit in the bag is not rocket science, but it does require some fundamentals.
And get out there as much as you can.
You got to get out there. You got to get there a lot. And if you don't have much game, you got to get out there even more often. If you got a lot of game, maybe you don't need to get out there as much. It's a numbers game. How many slips? A kill is equal to X number of slips, right? So in the wild, the hawks catch about between 25 and say 75% of what they go after, depending on the species of hawk and the species of game it's going after. But even under the best scenario, they're not catching every one. So you have to figure out how many do I have to see in a field, how many do I have to flush, how many are they going to chase, and how many of those do they catch? Well, you've winnowed yourself down to catching 1 out of 10, essentially. 10.
That's actually my ratio.
Yes. No,
mine is about 10%.
Right.
We catch, and since my hawk's caught 14, that means I've given her around 140 slips.
Yes, that's great insight.
And it took 140 slips to just get her those 14 rabbits that contributed to her success.
So this is an important lesson that you've already learned that a lot of people don't learn, is that like for every catch that you make, I've really had to work super hard and flush a lot of game. And that's not a failure on your part. That is the way the world works, right? That's the way falconry works.
And you can still have a successful, wonderful time out with your hawk, even if they don't catch anything, but if they're doing everything right. They're coming back when they need to. They're setting themselves up in the right position. They're going after game consistently. You might go home empty-handed, but your hawk did everything it did for success, and that's still great.
Having gone home empty-handed before, I can tell you that you don't want to call yourself a failure for doing it.
No, not at all.
But you should feel a little bit chagrined. You should feel a little bit annoyed.
Oh yeah, and I think that helps motivate you to get back out there.
Absolutely.
Like today, I didn't see any rabbits when we went out, and it was frustrating. And now I just want to get back out there tomorrow morning and find some.
Yeah, but you're not going to go back to exactly the same place.
Oh heck no!
Right. See, this is the lesson that you learn, right? You know what you missed.
No, I'm gonna go to a different spot and hope that the rabbits are there.
Right.
For whatever reason, they moved out of that area, and that happens. One day a field could be great, and the next it's horrible.
Yeah. Well, this is why the number of fields you need to have is way more than you think you need to have.
Yeah.
So a lot of people. Well, tonight I heard from a falconer who's not yet trapped his first bird that, he said, well, I can hunt in my front yard because I see a rabbit there. And this is the commonest fallacy and misunderstanding is like you see one rabbit in your front yard, that is not a season make, right? You can't build a whole season on the one rabbit. even if you caught that rabbit, you'd need another rabbit, right? If you wanted to catch two. So
normally, once you catch one or a few, those rabbits know there's going to be a hawk nearby pretty regularly, and they're going to leave that area.
Right. And so you need, you need tons of rabbits, tons of spots. You need to be able to switch spots because some days, inexplicably, there's no rabbits.
It's going to happen.
And so having a backup field and then a backup field to your backup field and then a backup field to that.
Absolutely.
That you can switch off. So,
And I love, some falconers don't like keeping track of numbers with their, like how many they catch. I mean, we have to report it every year, so we do keep track of the numbers so that we can report it. But what I love about keeping track of the numbers, it helps motivate me to get out in the field. It's like if I have a goal to get 60 rabbits before the season ends, this means I have to get somewhere between 2 to 3 rabbits a week.
Yeah.
If I haven't hit that goal, I'm back out in the field as fast as I can. Right. And it helps get my bird out more, it helps her hunt more, she benefits from it, I enjoy it more. I think it's great to have those healthy goals.
Right. No, I mean, catching game is a healthy goal, absolutely. The problem, from my perspective, with like an end goal of an X number, is that you may not be able to reach it. Does not mean that you weren't successful if every other day up to that you were catching game, right? Mm-hmm. Like you may have a disaster, which means you don't reach 60, but your bird was catching 8 out of every 10 hunts, right? So you were kind of approaching that 1 kill per hunt average, and so it's for me, that's my goal, is to be able to look back at it at the end of every month, and I do this at the end of every month in my notes. I can't tell you how many I catch just because I have to have that number in order to make this number. But the number I'm going for is like 1.2, 1.5. That's on average 1.5 kills per hunt. Or
so you're saying
kills for every 2 hunts.
It's good to have those number goals, but don't get too absorbed in it, and don't get too worried if you fall somewhat short of those goals. You want it, but as long as you are catching game,
as long as you're catching game, that's the standard that I think is reasonable to have. And what it helps you with is, like, let's say you catch 60 with one bird, but you only flew the next bird for 2 months. Well, how do you compare those birds? Well, one only caught 12 and one caught 60, but they both caught 0.8 head of game per hunt. Which means, okay, I did about as well with each of them. So one of them I flew say 15 times and caught 12 head, and then I caught 60 head with the other one, but you had a corresponding
more.
Right, threw a lot more. Exactly right. But it gives you that common denominator.
I would say don't compare your numbers with other people, because everybody's going to have different situations, different birds, different fields where they're going to get different amounts of slip, different quarry. It's going to vary so much, and especially when you're thinking of other falconers in other places of the world or the country. Well, your goal is basically just kind of for you and your bird.
So I mean, there's some people that you can't talk about numbers with at all. Right?
They don't like it, but it's okay. I think it's great to have that if it helps motivate you, get your bird out.
Oh, absolutely. Especially. And there's a legitimate argument to be made for somebody who's hunting a very difficult quarry under the most strenuous conditions. And the quarry is rare. I mean, so sage grouse, you're just not going to catch as many sage grouse as starlings with a kestrel, right?
Yeah.
So just the opportunities are not there. But I bet you at the end of the season, Steve's doing one intended quarry per hunt or more on it.
Oh yeah, he said if he went 3 days and didn't catch anything, he'd quit and just start hunting ducks.
Yes. Exactly right. Yeah. Because he likes to catch every day. His goal is to catch every day, and that's what I'm saying your standard should be. You should put your hawk in the truck, go to the field, expect to catch something. If you don't, it might have been unavoidable, but you should know why you didn't succeed, and you should fix that and try again the next day. So to me, that's not unreasonable, and it doesn't mean that I have to catch 150 head this year. It just means I have to catch something mostly every time I go out. And it doesn't have to be 10 when I go out. 1 on average means I did the thing. I completed the cycle. And generally speaking, that pleases the hawk. tremendously. They like to complete the cycle too. They love to
hunt, and they love to fill up their bellies.
Right. They love to eat. I love to watch a hawk eat. I still, from the first time I saw a hawk eat to yesterday, it's as much a thrill and a joy, to make into my hawk and help it with the core and open it up and watch it eat. I love it.
I think that's what's so fascinating about carnivorous animals, mostly when you come across like birds of prey and reptiles in general. You could tell a friend, hey, you want to come over and watch my bird eat, or do you want to come over and watch my snake eat, or lizard, whatever it is. But you never hear anybody going, you want to come over and watch my dog eat? Like, right. There's something just so fascinating about seeing an animal, be a predator, being a carnivorous predator, being able to eat. I don't know. It's so fascinating and cool. I don't know exactly what drives that mentality of wanting to see that.
But I think arguably people are predators, and we can appreciate that when we look and see it done really well. And hawks do it really well. Dogs, in their context, do it really well. And it's intrinsically exciting to see that.
I think it's exciting to watch a dog hunt and work, but not so much watching them eat.
No,
where it's like really cool to watch like a hawk or falcon eat. That's really cool. Awesome. Well, I think we've kind of come to the end of our time now.
No, I appreciate this opportunity very much.
No, thank you so much. Do you mind saying what books you've written again and where people can find those books?
Yeah, thank you. So the new one is 4 Falconry Fundamentals, and that you can buy that wherever you buy your falconry gear, or you can get it at Amazon, Amazon.com.
Awesome.
Under my name, and I've got 2 others. One is American Kestrels and Modern Falconry from Western Sporting in Sheridan, Wyoming, and the other also from Western Sporting is In Season, Louisiana Falconers Journal, and it's a soup to nuts journal of one season of my falconry.
Awesome.
Everything that was caught, but not just a list of numbers. It's sort of my daily experience, who I met, and trying to make a little story out of every day. Anyways, a falconer's journey, if you will, over the course of the season. So those are my books: In Season, American Kestrels and Modern Falconry, and the new one is 4 Falconry Fundamentals.
Awesome. Do you have any social media that you'd like to refer?
Well, you're welcome to come into my Facebook. I'm on Facebook at Matthew Mullenix, and also 4 Falconry Fundamentals has a Facebook page too.
Awesome.
So come in and read more about it, and see the links, and follow this journey that I'm doing around the country.
Awesome. I can put
700 miles.
I can put the link for the Facebook page in the description there for you, so that you guys can easily find it.
Yeah, wonderful.
That's awesome. So what are your plans from here on out?
Well, I'm gonna for this trip I'm gonna go to the publishers in Sheridan, Wyoming. I'll leave tomorrow.
Awesome.
I'll sign all the books. Anybody who's interested in having a signed book, if they order it between now and then, I'll sign it for them and inscribe it to them, and the publisher's taking your names and having it ready for me when I get there. I expect I'll just be in a big room with a bunch of books, and I'll be signing all day, and I'll be pleased to do that. After that, I've got a couple more people to meet and some more mentors to thank.
That's exciting.
And then a trip home and be doing honeydews for the rest of the season, probably, to make up for it.
Awesome. Well, thank you again so much for sitting down, chat with me.
Oh, you bet.
Wonderful experience to talk to you. I'm going to have to finish reading the 4 Falconry Fundamentals too.
Super cheap. You can download it on your phone if you want to.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah,
I will most likely do that.
Yeah. No, it's $3.99 on Kindle.
Oh, that is awesome. Well, again, thank you. I know I've said it so many times.
Oh,
and
my pleasure.
have a wonderful night. And
you too.
That wraps up everything.